The Harlem Renaissance was a ravishing time period that occurred in the 1920s, all occurring primarily in the center of Harlem, New York. This era is explained as one of which enabled a vast openness of expression for African Americans in the realms of art, literature, intellect, and many more. The historian writes that the Harlem Renaissance began from the mass migration of African Americans from the South to North. After slavery had ended, white supremacy and Jim Crow laws still plagued the lives of African Americans. Therefore, this migration was in efforts for a better life and in hope to escape the many hardships which took place because of segregation and inequality. Leaving all of that behind, African Americans put their mark on Harlem and transformed it. The National Museum of African American History defines the Renaissance as a new African American identity. The common theme during this period was a representation of what it meant to be Black in America. This movement redefined their lives and challenged the politics of Jim Crow laws, racism, and asserted political and civil rights. The many different forms of expression helped other races create a new point of view towards African Americans and better understand their experiences. Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, and Conte Colin are just a few of the names of the many writers who helped do that. These writers express these topics in their own ways. For example, Claude McKay would use poetic forms such as a sonnet. A sonnet is a type of poem that contains 14 lines and derives from the Italian and English, whereas Langston Hughes uses forms of African American folk forms. He did this because he wanted no part in white culture. He believed in celebrating African American culture. One of his essays titled The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, Hughes writes about how Black artists should embrace their culture rather than stray away from it and seek to submit to white standards. His poems were criticized by many other African American artists. An example would be influential artists James Baldwin and Conte Colin. Claude McKay was both Jamaican and American and wrote about the struggles that stemmed from that. One of his influential poems during this time, titled Harlem Shadows, goes over the racial issues in Harlem. He does this with the use of imagery, which is a poetic tool that helps paint a picture with descriptive language. The poetry from this movement delved into the lives of African Americans. This type of poetry gave poets the freedom of expression and communicated both the struggles and beauty of their lives. A great example of this would be the poem of Claude McKay titled The Harlem Dancer. This poem is written about an African American woman who's a dancer in Harlem. Throughout this poem, McKay depicts the internal hardships of the dancer and her resilience through it. He is able to see beneath the surface of this dancer and her struggle with topics such as racial identity. Racial identity was a problem that was still being explored during this time as a response to the new changes that were occurring. Although a new thriving nature occurred for African Americans during this time, there was still a great deal of damage that had been done to the community that needed to be healed. The poetry offered a great space to be able to share that. Poetry and literature overall offered a great space for meaningful change and awakening for African Americans in Harlem, New York.